Is it too early to talk about the playoff rotation, what it could look like? Heck no, it's not. What could it be for the Pacers? What tweaks could they make? Do they need to focus on it down the stretch of this season? How much does the bench struggling this year impact all that? Alex Golden from Setting the Pace is going to join me to break that all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today we are lucky to be joined by Alex Golden from Setting the Pace to get into something I've wanted to talk about for a bit now, and we're getting close enough to the playoffs. Less than 12 games, 11 to go for the Pacers to dive into it. What could the Pacers playoff rotation look like? Do they need to tweak anything down the stretch of this season to prep for that? Who should and should not be playing? And how does Bennedict, Mathurin being healthy this time around change those things? Really want to get into this because is there a way for them to start looking towards this down the stretch of this season? Well, we talk about that, who should and shouldn't play, how the minutes should go, and what the Pacers bench struggles say about all that. Great conversation. Alex was awesome. Let's just get right to it. Amazingly, in like 3.5 weeks, the Pacers will be playing playoff games. And the rotation will be an important discussion. Do they need to iron it out during the regular season? Who should actually play in the playoffs? Their bench struggles compared to last year this time make this a much more challenging discussion, and one that I have been unfortunately thinking about more than I should recently, which means I can't just yell about it into the void by myself. Joining me today, someone who, like Steph Curry, is not playing in Miami against the Miami Heat in the Jimmy Butler Bowl. It's Alex Golden from Setting the Pace. Alex, I hope you're not injured and you would suit up against your best teammate's former team.
Yeah, what's up with that? I mean, I thought there was a lot of pushback there from Steve Kerr saying that Steph wants to play. So, it's all coach talk, right? But I'm here. I'm ready to play. I'm ready to podcast. I'm ready to do this. So, a lot of really interesting topics or discussions we're going to have today because, like you mentioned, it's this bench is very up and down this season. And wow, I don't even know what to think from last year. Like, how much can we take away from last year for this year?
Yeah, it's tough. It's like game to game for a lot of these guys, right? McConnell was just good against Minnesota, but has had some rougher games this month. And Thomas Bryant's been definitely on a downswing. And Ben Shephard can't make a shot in March, but was awesome to start the season. And Obi Toppin has had 2 of his best games of the season last week, and also has some games where he plays like less than 10 minutes. Like, it's just kind of hard to parse through what their bench can be consistently. I know Rick Carlisle very recently, as in after the last game, talked about like slight shifts in their rotation that they've made right now to help certain guys be in a rhythm at different times. And like, that's all important, but the playoffs is a different beast. And last year at this time, the bench was hooping. Like the thing we have all talked about a million times, they would start the fourth quarter, TJ McConnell and 3 bench guys and a starter on the floor, and they would just dominate whatever lineup was out there for the other team, and they'd win the game. And it made everybody feel good, including the Pacers, about, hey, we can play lots of guys come playoff time, at least more than the normal team would minutes-wise. And they did. And I don't know that they can do that last year because I don't know where you stand. But right now, if you said, Tony, how many of the Pacers' current rotation players are a lock to play every single night in the playoffs? I would say only 7. And they're not going to play a 7-man rotation. Do you think that I'm right on that? Do you have an 8th guy you think will play every game? How did you kind of start this exercise?
Yeah, so obviously the starting 5, I think they're gonna
easy peasy.
Yeah, that's your 5, and then if you're looking, are you saying just from last year or like including Mathurin for this?
Oh, I'm including Mathurin.
Yeah, so Mathurin for sure is a lock. McConnell's obviously a lock, and then you don't think he's a lock?
No. Continue though.
I feel like Carlisle will make him a lock just because he's reliable. You have to give Haliburton some minutes. He loves having 2 ball handlers out there at all times. The one that I'm kind of torn on, I think he'll play, but I don't know how many minutes he'll play, is Ben Shephard. I think that they like his defense enough, and I know fans are going to get mad about that just because they think Jarris should be playing. I'm sure that'll be the conversation too if Ben Shephard can't find his 3-point shot again, because it's been rough offensively watching him shoot the basketball of late. But, I'm just thinking defensively, he's been reliable, someone that Rick trusts, and he does the right things that, Rick is asking him to do. But, I think for me, the most likely locks, I think Obi Toppin's a lock to play. Ben Mathurin, TJ McConnell. That's my 3 locks off the bench. So I would probably say 8, and then I think Shep kind of fluctuates, and I don't really know about Thomas Bryant.
Yeah, I agree with your like the back end guys. So the starters are obvious, right? They're all going to play, and quite frankly, in most cases they're going to play a lot. I'll be curious where the Neesmith, Nembhard, Mathurin conglomerate ends up sitting when it comes to minutes. We'll actually get to that at some point in this discussion. So for me, when I thought about the bench last year, they played 8 guys in every game when they were healthy, and then they had one guy that played almost every game, but not quite. And those 3 off the bench every night were McConnell, Toppin, and Shephard, right? And this is a very generic, probably too owned in way of looking at it. But that to me is 1 ball handler, 1 wing, 1 big, or 1 front court player, right? So they're playing the Bucks, and the Bucks have Bobby Portis as their backup center. They're not playing a backup 5 at all. They're cross-matching the front court all the time. They didn't need a backup 5, and it didn't help that Jalen Smith was really bad those first 2 games of that series, and they turned away from him. But Toppin played 5 a lot in that series, and it worked. So they didn't need to play a center, right? When they played the Knicks, they needed a center, so they played Isaiah Jackson, but they don't have to play a center. And Isaiah Jackson last year is better than Thomas Bryant this year, especially of late. So I agree with you that it would not shock me if they just permanently said Toppin is backup 4 and 5. But if they play the right team, that could be tough, right? If they play Detroit, for example, I think it'd be kind of hard to play Toppin at the 5 for a lot of a game. So Toppin is a front court guy. Their wing backup, Ben Mathurin. We both agree on that. That's very easy. In fact, even if the Pacers lose in the first round in 5 games, I think the most important playoff thing for the Pacers this year, besides winning, is learning how good Ben Mathurin is in that setting and what lineups he needs to be a part of. Like, Ben Mathurin's in, no doubt he's got to be playing 26-plus minutes tonight. You said McConnell as a lock, and last year he was and played a lot and shot 49% from the field and averaged over 10 points a game, was passing quite a bit. He was good in the playoffs last year. I would remind you all, first of all, that I said incorrectly. I was wrong. After I think game 2 or 3 in Milwaukee, I said, man, they might not be able to play McConnell anymore. They might have to stop this. This isn't going very well. And then he was great the rest of the playoffs. However, he was also much better in the regular season last year. So my question would be, what do the Pacers want to do? Would they rather, I agree with you that this is the most likely option, have McConnell be the 8th guy and play as many 2 ball handler lineups as they can at all times? Or would they rather have Nembhard be the backup 1? Guy was pretty good in the playoffs last year, if I do say so myself. And then have Shephard be their 8th guy and try to scrape by with like making sure that Siakam, Mathurin are out there all the time when it's only 1 point guard. And then that's how you have enough ball handling. So just because McConnell's been kind of inconsistent this year, I don't know that I'd call him a lock, but if they don't play him, it'd be Shephard for sure, because they would need another guard adjacent player or wing if Mathurin's that guard. But I agree with you that if you said who will be the 8th player, be knowing they'd play 8, it'd be McConnell. What about what I just said from start to finish does and does not make sense, given that this year's bench looks a lot different than last year's? Toppin is not the same finisher of plays. Mathurin didn't play in the playoffs at all, and McConnell's not playing the same level.
No, I mean, I think you bring up a good point about McConnell's level of play, and if his lack of shooting and, smaller size will keep him off the floor against a bigger team, potentially like Milwaukee. But I just, the one thing for me is just, have we seen enough from Andrew Nembhard running with the second unit to be excited about that? Because when they've played together, when McConnell hasn't played, it's been bad. And I think that's my only concern, even though, like you said,
I agree with that.
Last year, we saw a lot of really good stuff from Nembhard when Haliburton went out with the injury against the Celtics. Like, Nembhard went into like God mode for whatever reason and just couldn't miss a basket and was just unbelievable. But can he find that magic again? If he can, then I think there is something there where you trust Nembhard to kind of run the offense a little bit more. And maybe stylistically, him and Mathurin can figure something out a little bit more. But I always worry about, and I think one of the things that I haven't really talked a lot about with this year's group is just the floor spacing with that second unit, because we see a lot of times they bring Toppin in early in for Siakam. And I know Siakam's been shooting, a career high probably in 3-point percentage, or it was at 1 point this year. I don't know what he's been shooting as of late, but he's been a little bit more down than he was earlier on. So you include that with Thomas Bryant not being able to hit the broadside of a barn, and the same with Ben Shephard and TJ McConnell. Like, where is the floor spacing for a guy like Ben Mathurin who loves to drive? Like, I think that's what makes it easier to guard the Pacers with that second unit this year, is because even without Obi Toppin, they're playing with Siakam. there just isn't that great floor spacing that you're wanting, that you're getting with that first unit, with how well Neesmith's been shooting the ball, Turner, Haliburton, and that kind of stuff. So I think if you can kind of find a way to always have shooting out there on the floor, a little bit more floor spacing, that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. Because I think the hard thing with Mathurin for me right now, in terms of just like what exactly to expect from him, like you said, the big thing here is like, even if they lose in 5 games, right, in the first round, like what Mathurin can do in the playoffs is going to be huge. I'm just curious, like, we don't really know what his ceiling is yet, because we've never really been able to kind of see him, kind of take the lid off and just kind of explode into like something that we haven't got a chance to see yet. So if he gets more of an opportunity, that'd be great. But if you go back and look at their most recent game against Milwaukee, almost like a must win in Milwaukee, he played 12 minutes. And I'm wondering how much they're going to kind of, Rick, I guess, I wonder how much trust he's going to have in him, and how long the leash will be in terms of allowing him to play through mistakes in a playoff series, because it's a little bit different than the regular season. But I do think he's going to play. But how much will he get to play, and how much will he rely on a Ben Shephard over him potentially, just because he saw what Ben did last year in the playoffs, and potentially it could be the same thing for McConnell. But I'm not really going to make that argument right now. I just think that McConnell was good last year in the playoffs, and so I think they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He might be more of a first half type player and not play as much in the second half, like we saw a lot last year with the center rotation.
That's a good point. The Mathurin conversation is fascinating. I just was talking to somebody about this. Everybody, short little breaks so we can talk about the good people over at Game Time. There's nothing like watching basketball live. The energy of the crowd, the sound of the sneakers on the hardwood, and maybe even a celebrity-sided courtside if you want to catch a game in person. Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. You can check the Game Time app and see amazing deals on huge matchups coming up. Game Time Picks even highlight super deals, giving you the best bang for your buck. And with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So the theory of the playoffs, right? The game slows down a little bit. That helps players like him. Like Siakam was awesome to start the playoffs last year for the Pacers. Like he was the best player in the NBA through 2 games of the postseason last year, right? And so on one hand, and I fall more into this camp than the counter argument I'm about to make, to be clear. On one hand, it's very easy to say, okay, in that setting, he will have chances to look good, or if not better, right, than his typical night-to-night Pacers impact, where the team plays so fast that sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. And but let me remind you of this. They beat the Knicks last year in Game 7, and they take the stand or the podium, and a reporter asks them about their pace. Like, the notion in the playoffs is that the pace slows down. How have you guys been able to play your game and still win? And Tyrese Haliburton looks right at the reporter and says, do you think we slowed down? Implying they don't want to. They think they can play in the playoffs at the pace that has gotten them to be unique and talented on offense. And it largely worked last year, right? And their offense was the best in the NBA of the playoff teams last year, right? Still, with the season over, the best offensive rating of any postseason team last year. So on one hand, their pace wasn't as fast in the regular season as it was, their pace in the playoffs was not as fast as in the regular season. They will play a little slower. Everybody does, right? The game grinds down. The scouting reports are better. You take away tendencies. That's all great. And Mathurin will have chances to just be what we saw last week as a result of that. However, I don't think it's going to slow down as much as like the perception of this is. And so that is kind of where my Ben Mathurin intrigue is how much does the game actually cater to the moments that make him look like, such an offensive weapon versus what he's typically asked to do with the Pacers. And even if the game was played at a snail's pace or like the fastest pace in NBA history, he's going to play even as the best bench wing for the Pacers regardless. But I'm very fascinated by that element of this and how that maybe influences what his role actually is for this team, right? If he's not actually a ball handler and he's more of like keep up with the pace, play some defense kind of guy, and he'll be good in the playoffs and one-on-one defense, I think. But it's going to be – I'm endlessly fascinated by what his postseason will look like. And to that point, like you're saying, if they occasionally need to say, hey, we want a guy out there who literally will not touch the ball or like will immediately throw it to someone else if he catches it. Instead, how much they can play Ben Shephard. Not instead of Mathurin, but maybe next to him. They do, in theory, pair well with how often they require touches. But then you're adding in players. And like, what's the adage? Coaches trust 7, play 8 or whatever it is in the playoffs, right? Like it's going to be fascinating to see how all of that bakes into what we're already talking about.
He's such an interesting wrinkle. Like I think he's really the X factor of the Pacers for this playoff run. I know some people have said Myles Turner. I've seen that on Twitter.
I think it's for me. It's going to be Myles. I think, yeah.
But I feel like we kind of know what Myles is, right? I feel like with everybody on this roster, you kind of know. And Mathurin's like this wild card because you don't know what he's going to be like in the playoffs. We've seen him in very competitive games like that in-season tournament game against Boston. Like he was really good, and so that's kind of like your sample size. And he was playing pretty well off the bench last year, leading into before he got injured against Dallas. And so it was a big bummer. And, I know there's some defensive lapses with him as well. And that's kind of been some of the problems that him and Haliburton have had, not just offensively, stylistically, but defensively, having them both out there. It's been tough at times, but I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like Mathurin is significantly better as an on-ball defender than an off-ball defender. It's almost like he gets caught watching what's going on versus like what he's supposed to be doing in terms of off-ball defense. And I would just say, like, if he can work on that a little bit more, obviously that's going to keep him in games longer. But like the shot making, to me, it's going to be there no matter what type of pace they play. I'm not actually too concerned about the Pacers playing fast and him not being able to adjust to that. I just think what we kind of saw, even though it was a wonky week against Dallas and Minnesota and the 2 Nets games, or I guess the 1 Nets game when he came back in, I think they played one without Haliburton, right? Or did Haliburton play both against the Nets?
He did not play until Saturday last week.
Okay, so like the first Nets game, like you kind of saw how Mathurin was kind of taking over the game. But like I go back to that point about floor spacing because he was out there with guys that are actually a little bit more respected as shooters, which opened up the paint a little bit more. And I think that's where he can really thrive as a guy that can get downhill and put the ball in the basket. So we'll see how Carlisle feels about all of doing all that, because you still got so many mouths to feed with Tyrese, Pascal, Myles, and guys like that. But to me, he's such a wild card because if he can just elevate his game to another level, he might be the 6th man, but he might play more than some of the starters. I mean, he could play more than Nesmith if he's clicking offensively. But to me, I just think that it's like, how are they going to figure out this rotation? Because if they do play Milwaukee, like let's just throw that out there because it seems like that's the most likely matchup. The last game they played when Nesmith was not on the floor or Siakam, like the Pacers were terrible. And so you're going to have one of Siakam or Nesmith out there, even if that means Nesmith's playing some small ball 4. And I think that's good for Mathurin because that means he'll be out there as like maybe the 3, Haliburton and Nembhard, and then you go Myles at the 5 just to change it up so you're not always having to rely on Obi as that 4, because I just don't think Obi really gives you any resistance defensively against Giannis. And what other option do you have besides Nesmith? So I can see them going small ball, and that's where you give Mathurin even more of an opportunity to have more minutes.
Yeah, you could make your 2-3 rotation just around 32 minutes for all of Mathurin, Nesmith, Nembhard. You could make your front court 36 for Siakam, 30 for Turner, whatever's left for Toppin, and then the point guards, Haliburton as much as he can go, and then McConnell the rest, right? Like that would, in theory, be a way to balance it. It's interesting looking at the rest of the East, like you bring up the Bucks as the part I want to go to next, which is the Thomas Bryant part of this. There would have been a time, like early February, after he got traded to the Pacers through early February, I'd have been like, yeah, he could probably hang, right? Like he's making enough shots. That has not been the case anymore. They turned to Tony Bradley for real minutes in a real game, right? Like, and nobody questioned why they did it, and to be clear, I think Thomas Bryant's better than Tony Bradley, but like last year against, I already mentioned this part, but they played the Bucks. Portis was the backup 5. They said, great, Obi Toppin's our backup 5, no problem. Then they played the Knicks, and I don't think Mitchell Robinson played that whole series, right? Maybe he got in one game, I can't remember. Precious Achiuwa was the backup 5. He's more 5-y. Jericho Sims played some backup 5. He's more 5-y. I guess Jericho Sims might play for the Bucks in the playoffs this year. We'll see. Regardless, the Pistons with Duran and Beef Stew, I think you'd have to play Thomas Bryant a little bit if they end up playing Detroit. The Knicks this year, if they have Mitchell Robinson available, I think the same thing. You could not go Obi against that front line, or Cat, obviously. Changes things quite a bit. Like they matched Turner and Cat a couple times this season, right? Like, okay, then Cat comes off and it's, pressure from Robinson. You can't do that either. Boston, I guess you'd be okay with Toppin against Cornette or whatever, but if it's Horford as the 5, like, I don't know. I think that one's tricky too. There are enough matchups where I feel like they can't just plant Siakam Toppin as their reserve front court group. So even though I don't think he's played particularly well the last month or so, mostly the result of missing shots, but his defense has felt a little all over the place to me of late too. I think Bryant's going to play some, but not. I don't know how much to pencil him in for. I just think it's going to be required, right? I don't think it's their best 8-man rotation. I just think it's what the playoffs will dictate. And last year, the playoffs dictated they needed to play a backup 5, and Isaiah Jackson was like making 10-footers and like hook shots and stuff, and played quite well and earned the whatever he played, like 9 minutes a night, but like he did well in those chances. They need Thomas Bryant to make shots, obviously, but I think it'll be matchup dependent if he's in the rotation or not. And there's enough teams that would require it for a few minutes that I think he'll probably sneak it. Like Jalen Smith played 7 playoff games last year. He was behind Jackson, who played 15. I would guess that we see Thomas Bryant in about 3/4 of their playoff games just because of how the playoffs go, even though I don't necessarily think he'll be in that top 8 cutoff that a lot of teams go to.
Yeah, and I think Isaiah Jackson's a good person to look at because he was the 4th man in that second unit last year when the Pacers decided to go away from Jalen. They go to Isaiah. He only played 6 minutes a game against Milwaukee in 4 games, but then against the Knicks, he did play 12.5 minutes a game in all 7 games. So it does kind of make you wonder, and I'm sure some of that might be skewed a little bit just because he might have played more in a blowout loss versus not a blowout loss. But still, I mean, 12.5 minutes probably seems a little bit too much for Thomas Bryant to play in a regular rotation. But if you just look back at the 2 games the Pacers were fully healthy playing against Milwaukee, I think we were a little surprised at home. Thomas Bryant played 19 minutes in that game against the Bucks, and Obi Toppin only played 6. And then on that Saturday, Toppin plays 23 and Bryant only plays 5. So I think it's going to be determined upon what adjustments they feel like they need to make. If they start out with, I think they'll start out with Thomas like they did in Game 3 of the regular season series, only because Bobby Portis is a physical player. And I think they trust Thomas enough to guard on the perimeter because if you go back to the Knicks game a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was before the All-Star break, Myles Turner didn't play. It was after the West Coast road trip. They had Thomas Bryant start, and he guarded Cat the entire game. Even with Siakam out there, they had Siakam guarding Achua. And I thought that's an interesting decision just because, I know why Siakam was helping off defensively, but Cat scored 40 points on Thomas Bryant that night. So, it was just, and they were trying to pretty much match minutes too. So I think that for Bryant, his limitations are clearly there. And if he's hitting a 3, that's going to keep him on the court longer. But the moment he starts kind of shrinking the floor because he's not really impacting the offense, the thing that they really need from him, I think, mostly is the rebounding and the rim protection in those moments against backup 5s, just to give Myles a breather, because Myles needs to play probably 36 minutes or more per game in these series just because of what he's able to do with floor spacing, rim protection. And so whether you have to find Toppin to play or Toppin and Bryant to split up those 12 minutes that are left there in that center spot, I think you have to do it. But I agree. I think Bryant probably does play, I think, especially early in the first round, just because that's how it usually goes. And you kind of keep shrinking your rotation as you get deeper into the playoffs. But he's definitely going to have to prove it. I don't think he's going to be guaranteed a spot. It's more of a prove it type thing. And they'll give him the opportunity. I think his energy, though, I really think that's important. I know it sounds silly to say, but just the passion that he plays with, I think could be very big, especially in home games if they get a home court advantage. Just because if him and Beef Stew start getting into it, or him and Bobby Portis start getting into it, that's going to help get the fan base going.
He's a champion.
That's true.
Yeah, him and Pascal, the ring club for this team, right? Give him a blow, give him some chance. Did he even play in a finals game for the Nuggets that year? Whatever. He is in fact a champion. The last guy to dance around or figure out is Ben Shephard. I guess if Mathurin is in front of him, which he is, is Doug McDermott's rough playoff ad last year accurate? That feels too low. McDermott played in 10 games last year and barely played in a lot of them, 2 minutes or 3 minutes in one half of the game. That feels not enough. If you're just gonna do that, just don't play the guy. But Shephard is more reliable than Doug McDermott was last year, and defense is more important in the playoffs. So I don't know what to make of the Ben Shephard of this. They just cannot go 10 deep. They can't, right? They won't. And so I like you said earlier, I don't know how that, unless it's McConnell not playing or someone else not playing that we have forecasted minutes for, it's hard for me to figure out what his role would be, right? It's really hard to play 10 guys, and it might be an adjustment thing, but unless he starts drilling shots before the season ends, I have a hard time putting him in the top 8.
It's tough, right? Because he was so good last year from 3 in the playoffs. Like, that's what made him.
He shot it well last year. Yeah.
I don't think he shot the ball well against the Celtics, if I'm remembering correctly, but there was some really big moments where he just kept hitting shot after shot. And it's like, wow, this guy's just playing with, elite confidence. And right now he has been really struggling from outside. And it's kind of like to the point where it's like, I know that you play him for defensive purposes, but like, if he can't really provide anything offensively, like, how many minutes should he actually get? So that's where it's going to come down to. And like last year, obviously the opportunity was there because Mathurin was hurt. And I think Mathurin would have clearly got all those minutes he played. But last year in the playoffs, I think he had the best plus minus in the entire playoffs. I think Rick Carlisle brought that up out of everybody on the team. And he played 17.8 minutes against Milwaukee, 20 against New York. It's not going to be close to that. I think you're probably looking at like 10 to 12 minutes if he does play. Kind of like 6 minutes per half at the most, maybe 8 in the first, 4 in the second. But I think with him, it's going to have to be a feel thing. And if he's out there really disrupting and if he is hitting his shots, like, okay, maybe you give him a little bit more of a leeway to play longer, just because what he did defensively when you didn't have Mathurin and Nembhard against Cade, like, that was pretty good stuff in the regular season. I think it was the final game that they played against the Pistons at home. And it's just like, that's what he's capable of doing, right? Like, he has that in him, but it's just how consistent can he be as a defender? And, is it giving you more than what you have at your other spots? And I think with this team being so deep, it's he's got to be ready. I think that's what Rick would say. Like, he's got to be ready to play, but I would assume that he probably does get closer to the McDermott number in terms of like around 6 minutes a game, just kind of see what he's doing. And if he's impacting the game, I think he'll be rewarded. But if not, they'll pull the plug early and go back to Nesmith, Nembhard, and Mathurin, kind of just like you mentioned earlier, fill that wing spot out with those 3 guys.
So if we go off last year's starter minutes and a little bit off of the per game numbers because Haliburton left the game during the game when he got hurt, Siakam played 35.5, Turner played 32.5, right? So that leaves 28-ish, 27-ish for the rest of the front court minutes. Maybe that's like 20 to 22 for Toppin and the rest for Thomas Bryant, if they go to Thomas Bryant at all. If it's a situation where the matchup lets Toppin play more than that, I think they would do that. On the wing, Nesmith played 33, Nembhard played 33. We'll call that 32 for the sake of this. That leaves 32 minutes for Mathurin, Shephard. If they went all 32 to Mathurin, I would get it. If they went 26 to Mathurin, 6 to Shephard, if they took away some of Nembhard or Nesmith matchup dependent and gave that to Mathurin and then got Shephard some, I would understand that. But that is a clean cut to me. And then Haliburton was at 35. When it was all said and done, I would guess it was like 36 when he was healthy. And the other 12, 10, whatever. For McConnell, that makes sense to me too. Like, does that all add up to you, or do you think there would be something different from last year's starters that would shake that up?
I don't really see it being much different than what you just laid out there. I think what you mentioned early at the beginning of this episode was, if McConnell's not playing well, some of those Nembhard minutes could become the 12 minutes behind Haliburton, and that goes to Shephard.
There you go.
Right? Or does Jarris crack the rotation ever? Do you think that they give him any chance at all as kind of like this where we need to change something up? I think if they're down in a series, maybe if somebody's struggling, but I don't know. I don't think they're just going to go to him as like this wild card, but he is an intriguing like 11th person, if McConnell's playing bad to consider, just because, he played pretty decent against the Pistons in 2 games that he got, extended minutes, and his 3-point shooting has been much, much better than Ben Shephard's this year. But with him, it's just a lot of high highs and a lot of low lows. I just don't know if you can trust him in a playoff series, but just a thought.
If they felt like they could trust him, maybe they would do that as an adjustment. But I think we've seen from the decisions they've made that they don't particularly feel that way right now, right? I think they know they need to play him to develop him, but in terms of serious trust minutes time, we haven't seen a lot of that. So the natural end point of this discussion to me is it's kind of a weird balance, right? Like right now you're trying to not get hurt and ease out, but also win games. Do you think they try to, like, we just heard Rick Carlisle talk about how they tweaked slightly how Obi Toppin's rotation looked like when he came in for Pascal and what groups he stayed in with. And that got him longer consecutive minutes that helped his rhythm, right? So like they're still actively tweaking rotation stuff when they feel like they need to. Do you feel like at any point they try to shorten up the rotation to prep for this for the rest of the season, or would you stick with playing depth the rest of the way and in the name of health for the postseason?
I think I would lean more in the name of health. You don't want to go and mess anything up and try to play too many minutes. I mean, obviously, it's been a weird year for the Pacers. They've had a lot of traveling, and obviously going to Paris, things like that. Like, I just feel like it's been a long year. And to me, there's been a lot of times recently where Pascal almost looks really tired.
Yeah, I agree.
Like he needs a couple days off, kind of like the 3 days off or the 3
felt that
games
way
off.
about Drew as well a few times.
Yes. Yeah, he had some rough moments there, and I think he's looking a little bit better as of late. But if you want to really look at it, like, obviously they got to fight for these playoff season. Like last year, it was absolutely crazy because they were just like every game was so important. And like you think about, like, it came down to the last game, beating the Hawks to make sure that they get the 6th seed. If not, they're the 7th seed and probably, potentially out in the first round potentially. So it just kind of shows you like how important the regular season is, even though the games are kind of like a slugfest right now and kind of hard to watch and whatever. Guys have heavy legs and they played a lot of games and a lot of nights, like 17 games in the month of March is just crazy. Thankfully, they haven't had to travel as much. But yeah, I think you just got to do whatever you can to try to get home court advantage. And if you can lock it up potentially with like a game or two left in the regular season, maybe you just rest some guys, because I just think that getting some fresh legs for Siakam come playoff time is going to be huge. And usually there is about a 5-day break before their first playoff game from the last game. So that'll help as well. And the first round is longer, so that does help too. But that's the guy that I'm mostly concerned about, is just because he's had a lot of wear and tear this season and played a lot of minutes. But against some of the best teams, though, he's looked great. Like against Milwaukee, he's had some really big moments and just been so good. So I just think you gotta do whatever you can to make sure you get the seed that you want and not get cute with it, in my personal opinion. You don't want to fall to 6.
Yeah, I think health's priority 1 and hosting is priority 2. Maybe you could flip those. I understand that. I think health's got to be number 1. Here would be my like rough idea, right? And this is hard to do. I wish they had an important game left, particularly against someone they could play in the first round, because that would be the game where it's like, all right, let's test it today, right? Like for the first half or something, let's play 8 guys or 9 or whatever, and like see how this feels, see if it feels good. Then we're ready to go. They play the Lakers tonight. Like, that's a good opponent. Like, that would in theory be when you do it. They play OKC Saturday. The rest of their games are against like mediocre teams, except for at Denver. I'm not risking anything with the altitude if I'm the Pacers. They do play 2 Cavs games, which I understand if someone listening said, hey, those are the 2 meaningful games. I don't know this because they've been slipping of late and the Celtics are on fire. There's a chance the Cavs have already clinched the 1 seed by those games, and they just don't matter to the Cavs in the slightest, right? And so they would be resting guys or it won't matter. So it's hard for them to find a meaningful game to actually do what I just said. Like, right. I honestly think the best answer looking at the schedules, because of the back-to-back tonight starting, would be in OKC, I guess. Yeah. Try it for a half, see how it feels. But I think they don't tweak much and ride out what they've been doing in the name of health and hope they get there. And then they can follow our blueprint until it doesn't work immediately. And then they change up the rotation, because that's what good coaches do. And that's what Rick did last year against the Bucks.
Couldn't you make the argument they already kind of tried it out against the Bucks on the road in that game where
they played 5 guys basically that game?
I know. I mean, 37 for Haliburton, 39 for Siakam, 36 for Nesmith, 32 for Nembhard, 30 for Turner. McConnell played 16. Shephard and Mathurin both played 12, and then Toppin played 23. Bryant only played 5 minutes in the first half. So it's kind of like
that's the closest we'll see, I bet.
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel like they're probably leaning more towards, something like that. But I think, because there's a case where you could play Toppin more than Turner if Turner's struggling and Toppin's hitting his 3-point shot. But Brook Lopez is just, to me, like, if that in that matchup is just so big. I don't think he was as impactful in the last game as he was in that third game, where he was just, doing a ton of crazy stuff, hitting everything. But I just wonder. I mean, it makes you a little bit nervous when you only see Mathurin getting 12 minutes. But he's got to be on. I think that's the one thing I will say. Like, if he starts out a little slow, I don't know how much leeway he's going to get to play a lot of minutes if he's not playing well, which that does make me a little bit concerned. But we've seen that with him too, just the highs and the lows with him, and how his relationship, I guess you could say, with Carlisle has been, in terms of his willingness to trust him at certain times.
He was scoring okay that game. Like, he made 2 of his 3 shots. And like he's done well against the Bucks historically, but his defense stunk that night, right? Like Taurean Prince came in and put him under the rim and scored. It's like that can't happen, right? So I got why his minutes ended up that way that day. And the bench defense, I mean, their offense was not good, but their defense was so bad. So bad in that game. And you're right. Like if you want a glimpse of what their playoff rotation could be, that one might be the closest, albeit with maybe less of a split for the Mathurin Shephard minutes. But that's pretty close to what we've been discussing and describing. And guess what? That was their closest to must-win game of the season. So that is exactly what I'm talking about for the rest of the way this year. Is like if they had another game like that, we'd really, I think, see what they truly feel about who should be playing and how much. I think we got to the bottom of this. And we also identified, hey, their last 11 games are more about health and trying to get the 3 or 4 seed, which will be fun, including tonight against the Lakers. I get to watch LeBron. Possibly. It's a back-to-back. The Lakers might do some funky business. We'll see. It's a back-to-back for the Lakers and the Pacers, actually. Alex, thank you for the time. Where can people find you and the things you have to say, potentially about this topic, but of course about the Indiana Pacers?
Yeah, if you guys haven't already heard, there's a podcast called Setting the Pace that I host. So hop on over there. If you guys want to check out any of the Pacers content, you can find me on Twitter at AlexGoldenNBA. And I'm putting out, apparently controversial tweets that maybe some players on the Pacers don't always agree with. So it's always fun to get caught up by a player in the media room. But, you live with it. You take it on the chin and you just say, I got to keep moving better. Maybe I got to work on my tweeting. Maybe I got to watch how I'm watching the games and keep up with everything. But if you want to catch up with me there, that's where I'll be at. And, of course, my co-host Fach will be there to join me for most of those episodes as well. And if the Pacers win, that pep in the step is going to be quite large for Michael J. Flacci. So if you want to feel good Pacer fan talking with me about the games, Facci's your guy.
This week here, Pacers-Lakers analysis tomorrow, Pacers-Wizards analysis the day after that, and then Pacers-Thunder, which on one hand sounds fun. On the other hand sounds like 3 and 4 nights on the road for the Pacers against the best team in basketball. Going to be an interesting week for the Pacers of Indiana as they try to cling for seeding. We just learned that Cade Cunningham is out versus the Spurs. So keeping an eye on those standings as we do in Pacerland these days. Alex, thank you for the time. Everybody, thank you for listening. I lurk around on Twitter at Tony R. East and Blue Sky under the same handle. This podcast's account is at Locked On Pacers. I think there's a Locked On Pacers Instagram now. I've never used it, but I've heard it exists. So if you search on Instagram because you want to get basketball news there will in fact be a Locked On Pacers account. Thank you guys for listening. Check out Alex and Facci over at Setting the Pace, and we will see you very soon.